Who is Jesus? What is he doing? And what does it mean to follow him in the world today? My name is Matt Lewis. This is the Followerpodcast, and everyone is invited to the conversation. Hello everybody in Followerpodcast land. So we're at mountain number 2. If you've been tracking the journey, these are some of my reflections on what I was doing with Wurm Herrenhut these last 2-3 months. And some sessions I'm talking to you just out of my own thoughts, and some sessions I'm inviting people in to share their stories about the things that I've been learning. And today we have my friend Emily Wurm with us. So hi everyone. Hello Emily. And Emily was actually my team leader as we were out on outreach the last couple of months, and she had an experience that really spoke into my my awakening to this second mountain of staying, which I'll tell you about now. And I wanted to really have a conversation with her around some of those thoughts. So we're going to jump into that conversation, and as you watch and as you listen, I really hope that there's stuff in this that will be helpful for you. So thanks for watching. So we're at mountain number 2.
Okay.
And this is called the mountain of staying. Mm-hmm. And it's about choosing beauty at the mountain of reality. Okay. So for me, this truth happened when, when we landed in Kathmandu, right? Yeah. So, and we've had this conversation already. I had in my mind, I want to say like a Walter Mitty picture of Nepal. So I had in my mind like some kind of Tibetan monk on a mountain with a snow leopard. Yeah. And I was just going to be sitting there drinking mystical tea with him and waxing lyrical about like the deep things of life. And then we land in Kathmandu, and it is anything but that. It's crazy. It's there's like smog everywhere. You can barely breathe. It's like really, really thick smog. Thousands and bajillions and millions of people.
It's loud,
hooting, pop, 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 pop. Horns everywhere, people shouting. Yeah. You walk out of the airport, random strangers want to take your bag. Yeah. You're going through the streets, there's like stray dogs all over. It was just not what I experienced or what I expected. And I think, if I'm very honest, I was disappointed with that. And I had to then make a decision what to do with my disappointment. And this is why I'm calling this the mountain of staying, because I think we live in a culture that tries to avoid reality, particularly in our Christian culture, right? So much of our Christianity, so much of our following of Jesus is almost made like romantic and dressed up and looks really, really pretty. Yeah. Then we hit the reality of life, what it means to just be in the world and follow Jesus. Yeah. And we get super disappointed with that. Yeah. And so because we get disappointed with what it is, we miss what God is doing in the space, right? And I think I had some of that tension. I was like, I'd gone on the adventure, flown in the plane, driven in the bus, come to this strange country, expecting the Hollywood picture of it. Yeah. And then it wasn't that. And in the face of that kind of the disappointment with reality, I had to choose to see something new. And I think the best place that I kind of found language to put around what that choice was actually happened for me when a month and a half later, we were winding down from our mission trip, and we ended up going to this garden, right, which was called the Garden of Dreams.
Garden of Dreams.
Garden of Dreams. Yeah. And it was a place you picked out for us as a team.
I'd already been there.
It's part of our debrief space. Yeah. And so, I don't know, I hear the word Garden of Dreams and I'm expecting something. And so we pay money, we into this Garden of Dreams. And I remember a lot of people on the team were just not impressed.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to sell it too. Yeah. I'm like, oh guys, we're gonna eat pizza. We had this like amazing meal, and then we're just gonna relax in this beautiful garden. We're gonna journal. We're gonna hear from the Lord. Like this most beautiful space. This is what I'm thinking it is. And so setting it up, and you're walking in there, maybe not seeing that. I'm like, oh shoot.
I remember Monica, one of the girls on our team. She walks in, she looks at her, she goes, oh.
She's like, this is it.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting on this bench and I'm journaling and reflecting and doing the stuff. And you come up to me and you ask something like, you asked me, so what do you think about the garden? Yeah. What do you think? Because I think you were reading in the
I knew at that point everyone hated it.
and I remember I said to you, that's okay. but I don't really find Nepal beautiful. I don't find it beautiful. I don't find the city beautiful. I haven't found this experience to be beautiful in that sense. And then you entered into this conversation where you started describing how you see Nepal and how you find the beauty in Nepal. And man, that shifted my perspective. It opened my eyes to see a whole bunch of new things. So tell me a bit about that conversation from your side. Like, how did you experience that conversation?
Well, I think, coming in just with context, like I'm excited to go to this garden. I'm excited to bring the team there. This is like, in my head, a really, really beautiful space. And we show up and everyone's clearly disappointed. One of the girls asked, I think it was 3,000 rupees, which is about like €2. It was for the whole group per person, €2 per person. And so I'm thinking, like, it's cheap, we're in here, all this great stuff. And she's like, did we really spend this money on it? And I was like, oh man, like the team's disappointed. It's not living up to expectation. And so I was kind of going around asking people, like, what do you think of it? Like, what do you like about it? Isn't this cool? And I think hitting a point, you were one of the last people I talked with of like, okay, no one really enjoys this. No one really likes this. And I was, if I'm honest, like I was frustrated, and not at a place where I was angry or mad. I was just like, why aren't people seeing the things that I'm seeing, and why aren't they enjoying this? Also context of like, it's a cloudy day. It had been raining all morning. There's pollution in the air, and it's also winter. So there aren't really any plants. they're all dead.
There were a few orange flowers.
They're dead. It's just like twigs.
Yeah.
But I know that, I'm like, it's winter, we're here. Can you imagine how it would be in the summer? But also, isn't it pretty how it is now? Just this space, there's like all this beautiful marble architecture. So I knew a bit of the history. It was started by the British in like the 1930s, I want to say. So it's not just some new random garden that they put up. Like there's been money invested in this in almost a century. I'm like, there's history here. It's rich, it's vibrant. There's a lot of Nepalis, so people in the city are coming here. And I'm talking with you, and I'm just like, man, everyone hates this place. Yeah. And then you say, I'm not really finding Nepal beautiful. And we had also come from Pokhara, a different city, which is like known for its beauty. Every Nepali's like, go to Pokhara, see the mountains. That's where you can go hiking. There's a beautiful lake. You can ride on boats. We had just come from this like early morning sunrise where we watched the sun come up over the Himalayas, like beautiful stuff, some of the most beautiful stuff I'd ever seen. And then I hear you share like, but it's not that beautiful. And I think I mentioned there's the garden in just north of Cape Town.
Kirstenbosch.
Yeah, Kirstenbosch Garden. That I was like, okay, it's not that, but because I'd been there before and I knew it wasn't that. Yeah. But like, how do we find beauty in things of everyday life? Yeah. And we've been in this nation for almost 3 months. Like, you had to have found one thing beautiful. Yeah. And so I'm almost getting like righteously frustrated, and like it's bubbling up with what I see that's beautiful and might not be like commercially beautiful. So we talk about that garden, Kirstenbosch Garden, that's mostly tourists are going to and is making bank, whatever, versus a garden like this that doesn't have money pouring into it, or a city like this whose main purpose is not to be beautiful. How do we find beauty in that? So I don't know, it's sort of this thing that was bubbling up in me of like, man, this is what I feel like I've been learning. This is what I study. This is what my degree is in, how to look at things, how to find those pieces of beauty. That might not be, I can't think of any other way to say it besides commercialized or sold to you as a product or as entertainment. How do we find that in every day? So.
And then you start describing to me the things that you find beautiful.
Yeah, because you asked. You're like, nothing, I find nothing beautiful. What do you find beautiful? And I was like, well, this and this and that. And
so tell us. So what are those things? What you were looking at Nepal through your eyes. What are the things that struck you as beautiful?
Well, I just want to say with that conversation too, for you, it was like a marking moment. For me, I think I was just frustrated. So like, we were talking about it this morning and I was like, well, I don't know what I said. And you're like, oh, this is what you said. I was like, oh yeah, that's good. What I find beautiful about this city was mostly just from the people, from everyday life. I love color. there's so much color in Nepal. There are a lot of influences, especially in South Asia, just like color and smell, and like it's almost assaulting your senses, like how vibrant the cities can be. I also think about the way that food is prepared and served, how we're invited into families' homes and given a cup of warm tea without even asking for anything. How it's just hospitality is a way of life, and it's coming to this place where it's slowing down to meet with one another. That's a beautiful thing. I think about just even there are these like little shops on every street corner that are selling just everyday goods, food, you know, fruits, veggies, rice, noodles. It's where I get our noodles from, all that stuff. And you think about one shop owner who just kind of like throws everything out there, and it's pretty haphazardous, and like when you try and find stuff, you have no idea where it is, versus the shop owner who takes the time to organize things by shape, by color. And so all the noodle packets are like, you know, perfectly parallel to one another. All the oranges are like stacked in this tower. That to me is beautiful.
And I think as you were saying that, so you're telling me all these things in this garden where I'm underwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Like as you're telling me this stuff, it's like the garden starts changing.
Yeah.
As I'm looking at it, and I'm going like, man, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. And what it reminded me of is that story of Isaac, and he's on his journey, he's going someplace. He ends up sleeping on a rock, right? So if ever there's a reality that's not fantasy, it's that. There's no comfy bed. This is not like some kind of cool desert experience. This is the man sleeping on a rock.
Yeah.
And yet there he has this dream of the gate of heaven, right? And I wrote down the words he says here. Where did he put it? He says, surely the Lord was with me in this place, and surely this is God's house, the gate of heaven. And I didn't even know it, right? And so his eyes were open to see not something new that was imported, but something that was always there. He just didn't have an ability to see it.
Yeah.
And I felt a little bit like that. It's like as you were describing Nepal to me through your eyes, my eyes were being opened. And I almost wanted to go back and experience it again through that lens. I wanted to go like, let's go back there because I didn't have eyes to see, you know. And then I just thought to myself, how true is that of our generation and of followers of Jesus in the world? Very often we have this idea of what it'll look like to follow Jesus. We get to the reality of that, we're disappointed. And then we let that disappointment cloud our vision. Instead of developing the eyes to see that actually right here in the disappointment, that's where the gate of heaven is. That's where the house of God is, you know. And I wrote down a little phrase. I said, how many times does the idol of fantasy rob us of the miracle of eternity, right? So when we are unable to lay down what we thought something should be, we can't see God in the middle of what is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what your story, your perspective gave me eyes to see in that moment, you know. And I guess for me, I wanted to ask how you learned that. Where did you develop these eyes to see? What did that look like in your life?
That's a good question, man. I also think, sorry, just with that quote you were sharing, I mean, that's from you. It's just
Matthew,
not really a quote, it's a statement. But there's so much like thinking of fantasy as temporary and happiness just being temporary, versus if we're actually looking in and having an eternal perspective, there's joy with it. And so hopefully what was coming up in our conversation was joy being built up for the nation, over the nation, for the things we're seeing. And I think that's the difference of when we talk about everyday life, happiness, something being temporary, versus having joy, what we're going through. But yeah, your question, where did all of this begin? How did it start?
Yeah, how did you develop these eyes? Right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So I would always joke that the most important part of my body is my eyes. For what I studied, I have a degree in art history. I worked in the art museum world. I worked in art education, and I was like, I can't lose my eyes. Like that's the most important thing that I have. But I think it was more than just physically seeing, but developing a skill of sight and looking into things beyond what our eyes just naturally see, if that makes sense. So kind of all this started, when I was in university. I graduated about 4 years ago, and I lived in a really, really big city. And the last year there, I got a dog, which is really cool. You get a dog in a city, you start to see the city differently. And I don't know if it was just, like getting sad about me leaving. I knew I was moving out of the city, or having the dog, whatever. But I started to explore my neighborhood. We go out on these long walks. And I realized, I was like, I've lived in this neighborhood for 4 years, and I've never actually seen it. Like, I don't know who my neighbors are. I don't know what the house down the road looks like. I don't know where this street ends. And I started to discover all of that through the lens of, the 4 years in that curriculum that I was developing in formal education, just practicing it on the streets and seeing things. And also that process of me leaving university and kind of coming into knowing Jesus in a really, really personal way, that being opened up to everything. And so I think a lot of that was also in there with becoming an art teacher, where I was no longer looking at works that were in museums, but at kids' projects, which sometimes aren't that great, I'm gonna be honest. There's messiness in it, there's stick figures, there's, not any nice, formal, realistic pictures that are being made, but how do I actually look and see what's being created and see, wow, that's beautiful. You have a great idea here. This is something, or maybe it's not. And so kind of refining all of that, and in my walk with my Lord, really feeling like, as you talk about disappointment, being called into a time and maybe even a life change of looking intentionally at things that would normally just be everyday or boring or basic, and trying to find beauty in that. So finding beauty in the houses that were in my street, finding beauty in the car rides to work, finding beauty in how I make coffee, the food that I eat, what clothes I wear, what books I'm reading, like daily stuff that's not these big endeavors of going to an art museum and looking at this masterpiece or going to a foreign nation, but how do I find beauty in the everyday stuff? And for me, a lot of that practice was like all these little things being put together from my degree and what I studied, of taking time to slow down and actually look at things. So when I started working in art education, I realized that, man, people like run through museums at such a rapid pace. Statistically, if you go and visit a museum, people will look at an art object for 8 seconds, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then they're done, they move on. And they were saying that you should look at an art piece for anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes to really study it, to really see it. And I thought, how many times am I going through life and seeing different things that even a person, glancing at them for a few seconds, I'm not really seeing them. Or like as I'm eating my meal or as I'm driving to work, I'm just rushing to get someplace. I don't actually stop and slow down. And so for me, part of this conversation of, so we're talking about this mountain of staying and being present, the first part of that process is to slow down. And to really look at something for longer than 8 seconds, to be present with someone for longer than just a few seconds, and to really be there. And I think there was those little pieces that, built up to the conversation that we had, where I could have this, sort of list of items that I found beautiful. It was because I was maybe taking time to see those things.
It's about slowness for you as well. And I think for me, part of the question then becomes, so people listening into this, a lot of them are never going to go to Nepal. Some of them hopefully will. Maybe, who knows, But the reality is, like, some people are going to be at home living in the world that they're living in, doing their thing. And yet are no less called to the purposes of God, are no less missionaries in their field, are no less whatever, they're trying to follow Jesus in the context where they are. And I think this idea of actually learning to stay and to choose beauty at the mountain of reality is key for bringing a point of strength to the church that I think is needed at this moment. And the reason I say that is because I think our generation and a lot of Christian people at the moment, we've been caught up in the kind of narrative of our age, which is that it's better somewhere else. So we have this, a friend of mine, he'll say, an excess of choice is the root of all restlessness, right? Because we have this idea that we can get something else, we can go somewhere else. If our marriage doesn't work, we'll end it and find a better one. If our kids aren't great, we'll just get a better one. If whatever the thing is, we'll just trade up, stay happy, just keep numbing ourselves, keep anesthetizing ourselves so that we never have to wake up from the dream, right? And face the reality of our lives. And when we do that, we rob ourselves of the kingdom that's present, not in the fantasy that we're trying to stay in, but in the reality of what is. So again, I think of my friend in Port Elizabeth, and he's got 2 kids. And I remember when I'd stay there and wake up in the morning and having to take his son to school. And just the trauma of that, it's just real. It's real. All the parents in the world, they're just like, oh my gosh, that's intense. And yet there in the midst of that reality is kingdom. You know, and if we slow down enough and have eyes to see, we'll actually start to be able to figure out that not somewhere else. You know, even this video, I would hope it doesn't breed dissatisfaction in people's hearts, but I would hope it breeds a sense of inspiration for them to realize that the same kingdom of God we discovered in some mountain village in the Himalayas, they can discover in the shop down the street, in their kids' kindergarten, in the university classroom, in their high, wherever they are, you know, this ability to stay in a world that's calling us to be fleeting and moving and always chasing the next best thing. I don't know what your thoughts are on that idea.
Absolutely. And like, so what, I think my question is, what practices do we have that slow us down? I mean, we've talked a lot just in our journey, past 6 months being together. What is the process of, like, you know, contemplative prayer? And how do I experience silence and solitude in the morning? How do I take the time to slow down? For me, like, that's a spiritual discipline that I'm still developing. I still kind of suck at. Like, what are the disciplines? What are ways that we can do that? So it's not just like, okay, I gotta find beauty. I guess I'm throwing back a question to you. I don't know. So what are ways that we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why slowing is so key. In a world of pace, hurry, Dallas Willard talks about how hurry is the enemy of the soul, right? John Ortberg, he's talking to Dallas Willard. He says, hey, Dallas, if I could do one thing to grow my relationship with Jesus, what would it be? And Dallas says to them, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. You know, John Mark Comer just recently brought out this book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And there he's talking about it. And I think it's a truth of our time, is that we're caught up in hurry sickness, and how sometimes slowing down doesn't bring something we don't have. It opens up our eyes to see what we do have. That in fact, the gate of heaven, the house of God, is right there in the living room with your crazy kids. You know what I mean? It's right there in your dorm room as a single student in your varsity or your college. It's right there. And that's not to say that God won't call you to a nation or call you on a great adventure. All that stuff is true. But I think if we develop a spirituality where we have to consistently chase the next adrenaline rush to stay interested in Jesus. And I think this is maybe exhausting. Exactly right. And this is maybe where our tribe of Christianity, and I talk about evangelical Christianity here, we're a bit guilty of this, is that whenever we feel the ebb of our emotions, we just medicate that with another high experience. So we just worship ourselves into a frenzy, or we listen to the next song, or we get the next preacher, and we never allow ourselves to sit in the discomfort of reality and to find Jesus there, you know. And I think what you helped me see is that the beauty was around me all the time. I just needed to stop longing for the Walter Mitty version of that. I needed to embrace what was. And when I embraced what was, the kingdom was waiting for me there in the midst, you know.
Yeah, and when does that, for those moments, they kind of start and end? And so how do we, as we're talking about beauty, as we're talking about staying, how do we stay in that place, and how are we rooted out of a place of noticing beauty and recognizing kingdom all around us? And I think for me, that kind of goes back to sort of, I hate to like bring it down to a spiritual discipline. I wouldn't even say it's all spiritual, but 2 disciplines that I've kind of developed. The first is just turning down noise around me. And so, you know, you go on these crazy adventures, or you have these beautiful moments, graduations, birthday parties, you get a new job, you get a new car, whatever, and it's loud and it's exciting, but what happens when that kind of wears off? And so turning down noise around us to help us recognize the beauty in the everyday. For me, there's this one artist that I actually got to meet and share like a talk. His name is Nick Cave. He's a performance artist, and he creates these beautiful costumes that they're called sound suits. So they're made out of materials that produce sound. They're made of like sticks and buttons and beads and bells and just crazy. They're ornate. They take hundreds of hours to make. And he has a rule in his studio in Chicago that when you're working on these suits, it's completely silent. So as you're creating something that has sound, turning down every other noise around you to really focus on the detail and see the beauty of what you're creating and working at. And so for me, I felt convicted of like, man, as I'm walking around the city, as I'm driving to work, like it's so normal for me to just listen to music or have noise going on, listening to a podcast, but listen to this one.
Do listen to this one.
But turning down some of that noise around me to be present and to be focused, and that's where this contemplative practice of silencing your soul, stilling yourself, it really comes back to.
And you see Jesus doing that, going away, pulling away. We see that in his life. Yeah,
and so turning down other noises so that you can focus on kind of what's in front of you. As well, just another practice of, I kind of stopped taking photos for a while, and like every often I'll take a picture on my phone, but for the most part I want to see what's in front of me through the eyes that the Lord gave me. And so not which I think kind of goes along with like just Instagram filters and what we're seeing being presented and put out in the world. Like, how do we actually focus on what's right in front of us, the reality of it? And so putting down our phones, focusing on conversations, focusing on people, focusing on new things that are happening around us, kind of settling ourselves into it and being excited for, the mundane. Like seeing God work in, I don't know, getting excited about little projects that are happening in your neighborhood. Oh my gosh, a new neighbor's moving in. Or this thing's happening at my church. Or, I don't know, this new restaurant that's coming up in my city. Like, how am I seeing those things presently and being aware of the things that are happening without being stuck on my phone or stuck on whatever music is coming out of my speakers? Like, how am I present and still in there?
I remember there was a time on Outreach when I actually deleted Instagram off my phone, like 2 weeks or something.
Are you still off Instagram?
Yeah, I'm off. By the time this will be on, I'll be back on, because we have to use the platform. And I think there, I'm not making a case for us to go back to the Stone Age.
Sure.
I'm so grateful for technology and what it offers us. But I do think you're right. There needs to be a real discernment about what we learn. And I know when I shut down all that stuff, peace rose up in my soul. Absolutely. It was like a cloud fog cleared from my mind, like just taking away all that external stimulus and all that stuff that is built around the presentation of the better. Nobody's going to take a picture of their worst selves and put it on Instagram. All of that is, and so that breeds in us the spirituality of escape. And so if we're not careful, that makes us incredibly dissatisfied with where we are, and we end up missing the kingdom of God and the reality of our situation. And so I love those two things, man. Slow down, make it quiet, turn off some stuff. Because also saying yes comes with a no. Right? So if we want to say yes to the kingdom of God's here, then that also implies saying no to a bunch of other stuff. Every yes is loaded with a no. That's it, Man, that's good. Hey, Emily, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for leading me through Outreach.
Thanks for letting me lead you.
Thanks, guys. And thanks for listening in. I hope this was helpful for you. And as always, this is a new podcast, so referrals, ratings, all those good things. And if you want to have more of this kind of conversation and you found like this has been really helpful for you, get hold of me, mattlewis.co.za. Love to chat to you more.